Okay, so you have outlined how this was kept under control under what some call the Great Compression, where we had the least amount of income inequality and probably on some level wealth inequality, too, that we've had in this country. And the method in which that took place was redistribution. We had taxes that at the upper end, after a certain amount, became almost confiscatory, I guess, or arguably confiscatory. But that was after like the first 3 million or so that you would make as a couple.
Right.
Your idea to fix this is different.
Yes. So if we look back at the middle of the 20th century, which in terms of economic equality was a heroic era in U.S. history because of those redistributive taxes. The problem was those taxes could not be sustained over time, and they couldn't be sustained in Britain either, and in several other European countries. The basic problem is rich people take those 90% plus tax rates as a personal affront. And they pound on those rates and pound on those rates and pound on those rates until they knock them down. And we haven't been able to figure out a way to make those tax rates sustainable. And the basic assumption that we made in the middle of the 20th century that an economy creates inequality, but we can clean that equality up with progressive taxes, that was just inadequate. We need to challenge that basic assumption, and we need to prevent the economy from generating inequality in the first place. And I think that's where progressive opinion is shifting. And some people call that predistribution. We need to care about predistribution of wealth as much as its redistribution. We need to prevent inequality from taking hold.
And part of the failure of those tax rates is that it's also obscure. I mean, the tax code is so complicated that it's sort of difficult for your average American, it seems to me, to be aware of just how eroded those taxes have become. And then by the time they realize this, they lack the political power because wealth inequality has gotten so out of control.
Exactly. There's a basic political asymmetry here that the rich folks can see a direct personal interest, an intense direct personal interest in reducing top rates, and average working folks just don't have that direct personal interest in that thing. They benefit from greater equality in more indirect ways. And so given that basic political asymmetry and giving wealth at the top, they prevail. They lower those tax rates. So we need to go for an alternative.
Okay, so predistribution. How would we go about predistribution?
Well, this to me is the fun part, because there is a politically plausible path forward to going at predistribution. And that politically plausible path revolves around the power of the public purse. Right now, tens of billions of our tax dollars go to corporations that are expanding, that are increasing inequality by paying their top executives phenomenally more than what they pay their workers. So it's time, many of us believe, to cut off that spigot. That is, to deny federal government and state government contracts to corporations that pay their top executives, over 25 or 50 times what their average workers are making. It's time to end government subsidies to corporations that pay their top executives disproportionately more than their workers. It's time to tax those corporations that have wildly unequal internal pay systems at higher rates than corporations with more narrow pay divide. And if we go down that route, we can make a huge difference. And the great news is that we've already taken one step down that path. This year, for the first time ever in the United States, corporations must officially disclose the ratio between what they pay their CEO and what they pay their median or most typical worker. And those statistics have been coming out since March. They'll be coming out all this year. They'll be coming out every year from now on, and we can tie those ratios into legislation that leverages the power of the public purse, and that too has begun. This year, the city of Portland, the second largest city in the Pacific Northwest, Portland, Oregon, has a new tax on the books. And if you're a major corporation doing business in Portland, you now pay a business tax that Portland levies at a higher rate than corporations that have a narrow pay gap.
Okay, so we have, and we should say that the statistics on these ratios is a function of Dodd-Frank, which
Yes.
I have to say that I'm surprised they didn't roll that back in the last assault on Dodd-Frank.
Well, corporate America fought very hard. Actually, this provision in the 2010 Dodd-Frank Act, the Dodd-Frank Act is hundreds and hundreds of pages long. This is one tiny provision in that act, and corporate America, fell asleep at its lobbying switch and sort of let this slip through. Once they realized after the bill was signed that it was in there, they devoted huge amounts of resources to killing it. But the labor movement and the public interest community fought back, and we were able to preserve it, and it went into effect this year.
Okay, so now we have at least some measure of this information. Presumably, it's for public companies, and the vast majority, I would imagine, of these companies are public companies that we're talking about the CEOs. So we have three essential levers here, right? Government contracts, both on the state and federal level. That is that, I mean, I know that by executive action, for instance, the Obama administration imposed not restrictions on that ratio, but would not hand out government contracts to people who had been in the past maybe involved in wage theft or other, maybe you've got to pay a minimum wage, right? A higher minimum wage.
Yes.
So that mechanism it has been used. And again, we're not legislating what the pay is. We're simply saying you're not eligible for certain government benefits or contracts if you don't comport with this. It's almost like leveraging. You don't get federal highway funds unless your drinking age is 21, which the government has done between states and the federal government. Would these contracts, this would have to be, though, statutory as opposed to executive action, right? Because Donald Trump would get in office, and on day one, he would say, we're getting rid of that, right?
Yes, it has to be statutory, and that's the route that the advocacy community is going at, both at the federal level and the state level. We have 5 states right now that have where legislation has been introduced that goes at this. Congressman DeSaulnier from California has a bill that would tax on the federal level, has a bill that would tax corporations at a higher rate if they have a wide pay ratio. And we're now dealing with several Senate offices on writing legislation that is more omnibus, that covers all 3 areas that you just mentioned. And we're hopeful that could be at the beginning of the 2019 congressional session, we'll have an omnibus bill that will be introduced.
Do you find? I mean, let me ask you. I mean, do you? Why? And I guess these aren't mutually exclusive proposals. But why not also impact like the stock buybacks have been implicated in that skyrocketing CEO pay because
Yes,
they own stocks, they buy them back,
yes,
they increase the value of it, and also the capital gains tax, which I guess falls into that category of like it's just. There's not enough opportunity for political will because, most people don't deal with the capital gains tax. Your average American
that's right.
doesn't make their money through money, and so these aren't mutually exclusive proposals. But what's your sense about how much leverage you get with this proposal politically? Like, are people more sensitive to the things because
yes,
of
yes, I think so. And there's a fascinating, incredibly fascinating Gallup poll that came out this past spring. 6 years ago, and then again this spring, Gallup asked the question: does the United States benefit from having a class of rich people? Very basic question. Back in 2012, the majority of Democrats said, yes, the United States does benefit from having a class of rich people. This time, in 2018, the majority of Democrats said, no, the United States does not benefit from having a class people. From a class of rich people. So I think that the public is beginning to see that when we allow wealth to concentrate it at a economic summit, we are asking for trouble as a society. And I think that gives these maximum wage type proposals that we've been talking about enormous political cachet. People do not want to see their tax dollars wasted, and they particularly don't want to see their tax dollars subsidizing rich people in our society.
From a proposal standpoint, this is great, and I understand why it's referred to as maximum wage. But how are they, when they talk about like an omnibus bill of this, right? Like where we're going to deal with all the government contracts, all the government subsidies, all the government tax breaks that we give to Corporation A, we're going to eliminate those unless Corporation A puts its worker CEO ratio, pay ratio, unless it comports with this. What do they call that? I'm not just curious because I feel like maximum wage is going to set off some alarm bells, but saving tax,
right.
tax subsidies for wealth inequality is it doesn't roll off the tongue. But.
Right. The slogan that we talk about is cap the gap. Cap the gap, limit the divide that separates our top corporate executives from people who work at those corporations. Cap the gap, and that movement is growing internationally. So in the UK, Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party, one of its key proposals is to deny government contracts to any corporations that pay their workers, that pay their CEOs, top executives, over 20 times what their workers receive.
I'm going to work on that one. I'm not sure I'm on board with "cap the gap" as a slogan. I gotta say, Sam. But so what of people who say like, but if you do this, Sam, you're going to lose. You're going to lose this class of wealthy people, and then we won't get good things like new hospitals that are named after them, or wings of a museum, or what of the arguments that you hear like, look, these are huge drivers of philanthropy. I mean, Bill Gates spent $700 million on a school reform program. I mean, didn't work out, but
right.
But we.
So that philanthropy is a major argument, and it has been since the initial Gilded Age. If we don't let wealth concentrate at the top, we won't have philanthropic contributions, and we won't have great foundations doing wonderful things. But when you actually look at charities and philanthropy, you see a whole different set of dynamics. So average people in the United States actually give a higher share of their disposable income to charity than rich people. If we want to really help charities, we'd be putting more dollars in the pockets of average Americans. And then if you look at the so-called charitable contributions rich people make, the biggest single recipient of those contributions isn't enterprises that help people in need. It's the elite colleges and universities that rich people come from. So we have in Princeton, for instance, dormitories with mahogany window sills that have been built by the contributions from our super rich, and that's called charity, and they can take donations for that. We have vanity wings of art museums. At the same time, schools can't afford to hire art and music teachers. It's absolutely crazy that philanthropy is not helping the United States get better. And then you mentioned Bill Gates and his education policies. We have a democracy in this country, or we hope we have a democracy in this country, and that is subverted. That is distorted when rich people can get charitable deductions for money that they throw into their pet policies and impose on the rest of us because of their wealth. So that when you look closer at that philanthropic rationale for great fortunes, it just falls apart.
Sam Pizzigati, the book is The Case for a Maximum Wage. We will put a link to that at majorityreportradio.com. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.